Good evening. Would you sign in? Any sheet.
Good, man. Good to see you too.
Hello. Good. How are you? Hello. Would you please sign in? There's packets too. Hello. Would you please sign in? There are packets. Yes, thank you.
Good, how are you? Good to see you.
No problem. Okay. Hello. Would you like to sign in, please? There are packets too.
I have a question. Good evening. I have a question. Hello?
Regina? Ma'am, with the question, can you hear me?
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Karen. Hey, how are you? Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you all to Kent County. Thanks for coming out tonight.
This meeting is also being streamed via WebEx, so we may have guests joining us via the internet. And I understand we do have some folks on who are listening here. So we're going to be talking tonight about the American Rescue Plan Act, funding that the county received, and how it can apply to specific types of nonprofit organizations. And I'm sure you're all here because you either read about it or got a notice that we are specifically targeting senior service providers, people who provide services for the homeless or food insecure populations, people with disabilities, and youth and children's services. And these are priority areas that have Levy Court in the spring, they went through a prioritization process with our consulting team, who I will introduce in a moment. And a lot of what they were considering are based on input and requests that they had received since ARPA became a thing. We were receiving requests through mail, emails, contacts, various ways. And so in the spring, we aggregated them all together, and we worked through a prioritization exercise, and a lot of different priorities, a lot of different interests. Just by way of background, we began with the ARPA funding. Our total allocation for the county is a little over $35 million. We received half of that, $17.5 million, in the spring of 2021, and the balance came this spring. In the intervening time, we did stand up a small business grant program in conjunction with the Central Delaware Chamber of Commerce. Levy Court appropriated $3 million for that, and that project is just kind of coming to its conclusion now. And nearly all $3 million went out the door to help and support small businesses that were impacted. At the same time, we stood up a similar grant program for hospitality industry businesses, mainly hotels and businesses involved in the hospitality arena, because that is a specific targeted, impacted industry that the ARPA legislation identified. Levy Court appropriated $2 million for that effort, and so a good portion of that has also gone out to support our hoteliers and hospitality businesses. We did appropriate roughly $1.2 million of money towards a septic remediation project for a low-mod income area that has struggled with failing on-site septic systems, and that was like a one specific project that we've been working on for a while, but the ARPA funding helped put us over the top to get that project done. And then we worked with our fire service, and just recently $3.8 million was distributed to the 19 various fire companies and ambulance services that operate in the county, because all those entities lost revenue, the sources of revenue that they normally draw from, fundraisers, various rentals and things of that nature, that were totally eliminated during the shutdown period of the pandemic, really impacted them, and so we supported them. But we knew we needed to get to the nonprofit community, and so, as I mentioned in the spring, the Levy Court went through this exercise. They identified the 4 top priority areas in nonprofit. Doesn't mean that we won't expand into other areas later on, but initially we wanted to focus on these top 4 areas. And so we're going to hear from our consulting team. Before we do that, I'd like to just introduce a few staff members that are here that have been working from day one to help process and learn and kind of develop the programs around ARPA, because it's very detailed when you're dealing with federal money, and we don't often have to create on our own, on the fly, compliance measures to deal with federal entities. So Susan Durham, our finance director, has played a key role in helping us steer this ship. Laura Whistler is assistant county administrator. Mark Kennedy is our AV specialist, and he helps us host all these great meetings and bring people in via the internet. And did I miss Commissioner Jody Sweeney, who's in the audience here. Jody, thanks for being with us tonight. And Paul Davis is a chairman of our vice chairman of our planning commission, is also with us this evening. but I think he's here in a different capacity. So welcome, Paul. A lot of familiar faces here. So I would like to now introduce Gina Beinfeld. She is our consultant, a prime consultant from Tetra Tech Incorporated. Tetra Tech is an international firm. They specialize in a lot of different things, but one of the areas of specialty that they impressed upon us, we put an RFP out for services to help us with ARPA when we got into it, and we ended up selecting Tetra Tech because they were very strong in disaster recovery and relief programs and dealing with federal dollars and federal grants, major projects like Superstorm Sandy, and they were working with the city of Philadelphia on their ARPA funding, and Gina can tell you all the various places that they've worked, but they have a very impressive resume when it comes to this type of federal interaction and relief. So they're helping us do it right and be able to document if and when we have to prove to the federal government that we did not have any kind of fraud, waste, or abuse of our ARPA money. So I'm going to turn it over to Gina, and I know she has some folks on WebEx from her team that are listening in as well. So Gina, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Mike. And it is a true pleasure to be working with Kent County. The team here is just incredible. Welcome everyone this evening. Thanks for coming. Thanks for spending your evening with us. We will try to keep it to an hour, but we've got some good information to impart. Questions, feel free to open up during the presentation, or we'll have an opportunity following. So what we'll do this evening, and we're going to do some introductions for our team. We have a really strong team set to help in all manners, in all ways, from the odd question here or there, from folks that really feel like they get it and they can do it on their own, all the way to nonprofits who really need some support, even down to creating the application that eventually you will sign, but all manner of support communications. I just want to emphasize that. You'll hear me say it again. I'll introduce our folks in a moment. We'll talk a little bit about the program purpose, some overview of who's eligible, what the funding is for each of the areas, some of the other program features and deadlines. We're offering within this bucket 2 programs, one for revenue loss and one for capital projects. So you hear about both of those, what the caps and parameters are. Our friends documentation, which is important, as Mike alluded, to federal compliance, which is the umbrella that we work under here. And then a little bit of the application process and some brief overview of the applications, just to give you a little orientation. So I am Gina Beinfeld, Vice President Economic Development Services with Tetra Tech. I'm the project manager. We have a couple of team members to support from accounting, from legal, from grant management. So some of our folks are on the line this evening. Specifically, I'd like to emphasize this group of review staff that are here to help and support for all manner of questions. So Edison, Rachel, Lenny, and Aziza, Rose, and Roy, could you put on your cameras? And I'd like to put a name or two to faces. All right. So we have Edison Montalvo. Good that your picture happens to be on the far left and first. Edison is available as a general point of contact. You'll see we'll be assigning these folks to 2 organizations as you begin to submit your intake forms. But before that happens, if there are any general questions about eligibility in the program and what ifs, Edison is your man. We have Aziza Salomon. Apologies. She is here to help also with the loss recovery program. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Lenny Curcio is there. He is also with the CLR program, the COVID Loss Recovery. And there's Rachel Gibbs. Roy is off the screen, but Rachel and Roy will be working on the capital improvement program and supporting that. And then Rose, our fair Rose, who also may be off the screen, unfortunately, is our system administrator. So she's all things IT. All righty. So thanks, guys. To the program purpose. So I'm going to read a little bit here, but there are a couple of important points, and there's a reason to why I'm reading. The programs are available to nonprofit organizations whose missions and service offerings primarily serve one or more of the at-risk populations. Mike mentioned children and youth, disabled, homeless and food insecurity, and seniors. It's to assist the organizations, your organizations, to respond to and recover from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Eligible nonprofits, we really have not set any parameters around the specific types of nonprofits, 501Cs, 19s that serve military, others as well. The real limiting factor around eligibility is that you're serving one of these populations or one or more of these populations. As well, you'll see why this is the case because we compare years. The nonprofit can be fairly newly established, but not after 2020. So any nonprofit established 2020 or before, and I'll call attention to that later as well. And then finally, American Rescue Plan Act. Within ARPA, there are many buckets of funds. This in particular is the State and Local Financial Recovery Fund, SLFRF. Don't try to pronounce it. It does not go well. So as you read materials, you'll see ARPA referenced, you'll see SLFRF. It's really one and the same. It's like saying the County of Kent, Department of Finance. County of Kent, comma, Department of Finance. Kind of one and the same. Let me do a little bit of deeper dive here into the 4 areas. A little clarity of understanding, and maybe it'll spur some questions a little bit later. Children and youth, education, counseling, childcare. You'll see food assistance sprinkled throughout all of the areas, and other child and youth support services. It's very broad. It's intended to be broad to try and be inclusive. Disabled, so visual, hearing, mobility, developmentally disabled, a broad group there. Again, educational, employment assistance is an ad there, transportation services, food again, and other support services. So our theme will be other support services through these. Homelessness and food banks, a pretty obvious one, individuals and families, including temporary housing, such as shelters, food assistance providers, guidance counseling, homeless support services providers. Food assistance in this one also includes food banks, food pantries that serve children, their families, and the general public. So that one kind of goes a little more broadly. And then senior services and senior centers, community centers, food assistance, transit, and other support services for seniors. Again, broad category there to be inclusive. So what about Kent County and where your organizations are? So the theme of this slide really is serving Kent County in some capacity. So some nonprofits are located and you serve wholly Kent County or serve a community within the county. Easy peasy. Some are located here and serve Kent County and other areas. So it's the portion that you serve Kent County. And then some folks may be located outside the county, and you serve a regional area that includes Kent County. Fine. And some may have a satellite location here and also serve other areas. So the key here, the turnkey is in some fashion serving Kent County residents. It does not have to be 100% serving Kent County residents. So again, pretty broad and flexible, we think. In terms of the overall funding, the levy court allocated $8 million to start for these 4 areas. Starting off equal, $2 million in each of the areas. Additional funds, if needed, would be considered, as well as, depending on demand, if one area is utilizing fewer dollars and we're getting more demand in another, reallocating or reapportioning among the 4 groups. So everybody's even Steven at the start. Okay, and this is the great fun page. So applications. There is a deadline, but we are not making everybody wait to the deadline to have their applications considered. So they're being taken on a rolling basis. It's first come and first complete. So if you get something in and we have to ask for lots of additional documentation or something of that nature, then it'll take us, our review period will take a little bit longer. So first come and first complete, first served basis. We anticipate that once an application is completed, that it'll take about 3 weeks for decision. And that due date of Friday, October 28th at 5 p.m. gives a good 3 solid months. The program launches tomorrow at 9 a.m. Actually 8 a.m. the website says. So everyone will be able to look towards the website to get the application materials, and the documents in your packets this evening will also be posted there. Throughout the process, as I've mentioned already, we have significant staff devoted to the program to answer all questions and eligibility in a really timely way to support you. So make use of them. Call them a lot, email them a lot. That's what they're here for. And then finally, in the review process, the decisions, there is an appeal process, always a good practice to offer that. Should there be any concerns around the award amount or compliance, something of that nature. And there's a little further information on the appeal process. So that's a little down the road, but I want you to know that that's available to you. So let's dig into the 2 programs. So we have the COVID Loss Recovery, CLR program, and the COVID Capital Improvement, CCI program. CLR, CCI. The COVID Loss Recovery is really about the financial losses that your organizations endured as a result of the pandemic. Decreased revenues, and what we mean by that can be lost government funding, it could be lost fee for service funding. It could be your fundraising was simply had to be canceled, or the attendance was very, very low. Those things where you normally have certain revenues to support your organization, and they were decreased. You also may have had increased costs, increased expenses, perhaps in staff, payroll, because folks were out, or perhaps they needed You needed to staff up to provide services. Maybe you needed to run longer hours, things of that nature. You could also have endured greater cleaning supply considerations and greater cleaning costs. So those kinds of things would be increased costs. We compare the 2019 revenues. So you'll see in the application, you'll see 2019 dollars, and we compare the really dire 2020 COVID numbers against 2019, kind of take the difference. And 2021, there were still financial losses being suffered, maybe not quite so acute. So we compare 2019 to 2021 and take the difference. So you're getting a 2019 pre-pandemic year, and you're comparing it against a pandemic year and a second pandemic year, 2020, 2021. We have program cap on that of up to $100,000. So hopefully that is a great compensation. And we're looking to see your responses on that. On the capital improvement program, this is for capital projects, construction projects. These are to expand, build, improve physical facilities. But it's not simply to put a roof on the facility. It needs a COVID or pandemic-related reason for it occurring. Did you need to expand because you needed to social distance or for additional capacity that needed to be managed during the pandemic? Things of that nature. A new roof potentially could be, because the current roof leaks and it doesn't allow us to be in this room, which means we're cramped, and for social distancing, it's needed. So think about your projects, if you have capital projects, and how they are related to the pandemic. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple minutes. Here, the cap is higher, construction project, up to $500,000, or up to 50% of the project cost, whichever is less. You can apply for both the CLR and the CCI programs, no problem. They are incorporated in one application, different sections, but one application, so you don't need to go looking for two applications. In case it isn't clear, you can only apply once, though. You can't apply for each program more than once. Little deeper dive into the CLR program. Decreased revenues, I've kind of mentioned already. Recurring fundraising events. Could you not hold your annual gala if you hold an annual gala? Did you have things that you were planning to do in 2020 and they just completely got scrapped, had to be canceled because COVID? Other fundraising activities, and not necessarily fundraising, but fee related. So your fee for services, was that off because of COVID? If it was increased, good job. Focus on the ones that you lost dollars on between 2019 and 2020, and 2019 and 2021. And then any public sources, if you got foundation funding, donations were off because of COVID, governmental sources, those kinds of things. So it's not an exhaustive list, it's to try to give you a flavor. So ask your questions on what's eligible if you've got particular considerations that I don't happen to be mentioning. Increased costs again, the cleaning, the PPE, even improvements internally within your facilities. Perhaps you had to put up temporary partitions, or you had to put down social distancing stickers, or you had spent a fortune on PPE. You had to double your cleaning services, those kinds of things. Overtime pay, additional staff costs that I already mentioned. And then your decreased funding, your decreased revenues are taken along with your increased expenses. So those two items are added. And then there's this item of offset funding, where perhaps you had a municipality provide you funds to compensate for COVID, or a foundation provided you some dollars, the COVID Response Fund or CARES Act compensated for the decreased revenues and increased costs that you're applying for in this program. So it's a little bit of a subtlety and a fine point. If you received funds from one of those sources and it compensated you for a certain set of costs, it doesn't mean that your whole organization, you can't apply. You may have had other costs or may have had other revenue losses that funding did not cover. Apply, ask, let's sort it and see how we can make that work. So it doesn't mean that if you received other funding from another source that's it, you're done, don't apply. Ask, let's look at it, let's consider it and find ways to get that funded. Okay, the other program, the Capital Improvement Program. So this program for construction and rehab and capital projects. So a couple of important points. It must respond to the public health and negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Said that already. You really need to show a pretty direct correlation around your project and COVID. It needs to be reasonably proportional to the pandemic impact identified. So putting a new wing on the facility for the sake of a very small impact related from COVID is an example of not proportional. So the folks that you are helping, you want a good significant number of clients, of folks that your organizations are assisting to be benefited by the project. It must be reasonably designed to benefit that impacted population, and it must meet one of our favorite terms, the enumerated use. So here we're getting a little chapter and verse with the ARPA and the SLFRF guidance. So let me bear on your patience here for a moment, and we'll look at these enumerated uses. There is a list that's more extensive in your packets that lists out everything. What I have here on the page are really related, the highlights related to the 4 population areas. So adaptations to congregate living facilities, skilled nursing facilities, long-term care, homeless shelters. You can see where the senior and the homeless and perhaps group homes for developmentally disabled can apply here. Affordable housing, but also supportive housing or recovery housing, again, those kinds of populations. Food banks and other facilities dedicated to addressing food industry, Rail Brightline, food banks, food pantries, quite clearly eligible. Transitional shelters, temporary residences, again, homelessness, pretty much anything related to children and youth, childcare, daycare, early learning facilities, and the like, and then schools and other educational facilities or equipment addressing disparities. So these, we didn't write these. We're excerpting from the Treasury and ARPA guidance here. But this is, kind of how you thread that needle. Yes, there's a question. Is it a capital project you're asking about? Uh, Okay, I think we would want to talk about that, but I think yes. Yeah. Yep. See, that's my default is, well, let's talk about that. Let's get someone on that, because I don't like to, try to answer questions without really fully understanding, but it sounds like we'll be able to get it in. Okay, other requirements on the capital improvements program. So a little subtlety here in language. Payments so approval of funding under this program is for prospective work, meaning work that's gonna be done. It does not mean that your project can't already have started. Maybe you're in design, maybe you're even in construction, and there's a gap, and holy cow, what are you gonna do? This program can potentially assist. So the funding needs to be for the work that has not yet been done, prospective. It will be reimbursed, which means, apply, approval, do the work that was approved, and the funding will be reimbursed for that. I hope that makes sense. We have some criteria that hark back to the federal funding. Funds must be committed by December 31st, 2024, which should be well in hand here. But the project has to be completed by the end of 2026, so December 31st. Sounds like it's a ways away, but some capital projects can have extended periods of time for design, for permitting, for construction, kind of thing. And by completed, we mean it does not necessarily have to have a final certificate of occupancy. It needs to be open and performing its primary function. So if you haven't finished the last, trim work, it's okay. Just so long as it's open and performing its function. Applying to the program, you need to be able to present the other funding sources and that they're committed. I know sometimes that can be hard and that can be pretty challenging, but it is, these funds have a time frame and a time clock. So it's a bit of a necessary evil here. Procurement requirements, no, you don't have to do the federal procurement. We encourage open bidding and open competition for your design, your construction services, but it is not a requirement. Was there a question? Yeah, I think that would work. In capital campaigns, you get commitments over years, as you're suggesting, and then you get a certain in this universe, you get a certain potential attrition. So we would want to look at what the capital campaign was yielding, estimate on what might fall by the wayside. But as those are, that's a source that we could rely on. So if you've got written commitments of pledges for 3 years, I think that's pretty solid. That would stand. Yes, but if you are building in phases, I mean, you know, it could be something super small and I'm not speaking, you know, I'm speaking gibberish. Or if you're building a really, you know, kind of complex, your project could be phased so that you might have funding for the first portion that's all wrapped up and you just need that gap, and the CCI program can help you with that. Where the full build out, you won't necessarily need to have funding for the full build out. Just whatever phase it is that is applied for can stand on its own, if that makes any sense. A couple other questions. Yes. Yes, you. No, no, there is not. We encourage for new work that you consider bidding. But if you've got someone that's working on the project already, that's okay. You also, sometimes with government funding, Davis-Bacon also comes up. So let me answer that one now. That the environmental as well as the Davis-Bacon requirements do not apply. It's not to say, there's some real complexity to this funding, but there is some real relief to it as well. So Davis-Bacon is the prevailing wage. The state may still have requirements, but the federal government on Davis-Bacon. And your state may still have environmental requirements, but the federals do not apply. Okay, anything else? Yeah, you're asking some great questions. These are excellent questions. If you have 3 funding sources in your project, in that phase of your project that you're applying for SLFRF dollars for through the Capital Improvements Program, what I said for the Capital Improvements Program doesn't trigger these others. But if some of your funding is federal, or it's state and it comes with it, usually it means the whole project. So while these funds wouldn't trigger it, you may still have to work under it because of the other funding source. I don't want to speak to get out in front of my skis here on state requirements. Generally speaking, if there's a state requirement, comply with it. You need to. If there is some waiver or it doesn't exist, then you don't have to. So just because these are federal dollars and they're coming from the American Rescue Plan and U.S. Treasury doesn't mean it absolves other governmental requirements that the state might have, the locality may have. So it's good, but it's not that good.
Gina?
Okay,
Gina,
yes.
I think you have a colleague that sent a chat.
Oh, thank you. Uh, my eyesight is, please ask Gina to repeat to the audience the question. Yes, I apologize. So our last couple of questions have been, as you can tell, around compliance, construction compliance, Davis-Bacon prevailing wage, requirements of state funding versus the federal funding. This has really just been about capital projects. Thank you for that reminder. I will do that. Last but not least, here on the page, written justification. Oh, I know you're going to love writing things about your projects. They're wonderful projects. You should love them. If a project cost is $1 million or over, so not what you're applying for, if your project's construction cost is over $1 million, there's a requirement that there be an explanation of how the project is related and reasonably proportioned to the pandemic impact identified, and reasonably designed to benefit the impacted population or class. Again, that's that proportionality concept. So you'll see we've got a little box for justification. If you're not sure, ask us. If you're not sure and want to write about it, go right ahead. It's no harm, no foul. It helps us understand the program, the project a little better. Okay, I'm going to move to the application process. So feel free to, as you have been, ask questions, even if it's on a previous slide. I do that sometimes. Application process. We've sort of got a little bit of a two-step here, even though it's a six-step on the page. So I'll walk you through it briefly. We have an online intake form. This intake form, as I had said a little earlier, at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, this form will be available on the Kent County website, where you found information for this program. It'll be Start Here. So that form is simple. I'll walk you through it in a couple minutes. Pretty easy peasy, few pages. That gets you started. When you submit that form, you get an automated email with a PDF of what you submitted. So you can't print before you submit, but you can receive a copy following. Within 2 business days, you are assigned one of the wonderful staff who you met at the beginning of the meeting. They are there to answer all your questions and provide any support and help that you need. That staff person will send you an email that welcomes you. They'll provide a detailed application. It's a spreadsheet where you can enter your revenue losses, your expenses, offset funding. You can also apply for the capital improvement program. You will also receive access to Nucleus One. Nucleus One is software. It's like a share software. Anyone who has dragged and dropped into any number of share drives, OneDrive is one, Microsoft OneDrive, other share drives, such as Dropbox. It's a drag and drop kind of utility. But what it offers us is a whole lot more flexibility on the back end to organize and keep files together and documents together. So like many that you might have experienced, you get an invitation in an email. You know, my company uses Teams. You have been invited to Teams. You have been invited to Nucleus One. You sign in. There's a typical authentication where you get a passcode, sends you an email, you get a passcode, you put that in. Very similar to other kinds of authentication. You probably have done very similar things when you do your online banking, if you do online banking, or you've done anything that's kind of financially secure for your personal finances. You don't have to download the software. There's no fees. It's just you have access to it. Then you work with the detail application, that spreadsheet, with your information, gather your documentation, and upload it to Nucleus One. It doesn't all have to be done at one time. And you can stay on it for up to 30 days. And when you're done with the detail application, you go ahead and submit that through Nucleus One too, as well. That is the application process in simple. We also gave you a very helpful guide. It's called the Application Process Step-by-Step Guide. I'll refer to it again later. It's your friend. Walk through that. We provide some screenshots of what you will receive, what they look like, so it walks you through it. And it's not excessively long. It's only a few pages, so digestible. Okay, and now our favorite, documentation. So within the federal funding, to the greatest extent that's possible, the documentation for these lost revenues, increased expenses, offset funding, and the capital projects should have third-party documentation as opposed to your QuickBook preparation or internal documentation. As a second choice, as a fallback, we'll look at those if they are unavailable. I'll talk about that in just a second. But as you are looking at your revenues that may have been lost, bank statements, in 2019 versus 2020, they can reflect those. Deposit slips if you've had fundraising events. We will accept event budgets that are internally prepared. So, your annual gala, and you do like a report out to your board. You brought in so much revenue, there were so many costs related for, renting the tables and the, cutlery and such. And, here's how much funding was raised as a result. On the flip side of that, when you could not hold your events, event cancellation contracts or communication related to that. Certainly fee-for-service contracts, that's straightforward. Letters from the government regarding funding for expenses, bills, receipts, purchase orders, invoices, payroll. Now here's one that I'll pause on for a moment. Your payroll may have decreased. Okay, don't really need to know about that. If your payroll increased as a result of COVID because of absences, illness, overtime, serving additional clients, you had to pay folks more, you had to bring in additional staff to support that. In normal disaster recovery circumstances, everybody knows that there is this funding coming. There's disaster funding coming. And so there's this high bar of documentation down to the hour of what staff was used and how they were deployed to respond to the disaster. That's not the case here. No one knew that ARPA was coming. So your payroll may reflect something in 2019 and a total different in 2020 that's got a positive delta. In other words, it increased. We will accept that increase with an explanation as to what occurred. Had to hire so many more people, resulted in such and such. So there's justification section in the application for you to do that. So don't feel like you got to go back on every blessed payroll and figure out who was paid when and who was overtime for what reason. Don't worry about it. Tax returns are also helpful to us. That attestation in certain circumstances, what I was just mentioning, and other forms of evidence. So we haven't thought of everything. If you have circumstances, you have questions, ask. Okay. Getting down to the bottom here. Documentation on CCI. A lot of this documentation is really around understanding the project and its ability to be completed within the time frame by December 31st, 2026. So we'll ask you a lot of documents. Nucleus One can handle it. Your development budget and your pro forma, site control, however you have site control, any plans that you have, whether you're in design or all the way, through to construction drawings, what your development schedule is, any bids or contracts that you've entered into, commitment letters for the funding sources. So we're going to be asking your sources and uses. So we'll want to see those commitment letters. Governmental funding, of course, invoices, purchase orders, any change orders. So this would be like when you're in process, and other information around your projects. So again, not an exhaustive list, but gives you a flavor. And most of these should be able to be provided. This attestations in certain circumstances is probably going to be we will look much more closely at documentation and whether it's available. So the attestation will be used in a much more limited fashion in this program. Oops. Okay. So is there a question? No. This one final slide, and then I'll walk you through a couple of the applications, and we can take some more questions. So again, on Kent County's website tomorrow morning, there'll be language that the program is open, and there'll be two links. There'll be the start here for the intake form, and there'll be program documents, which are the documents in your packet, along with the PowerPoint from tonight, and Mark is going to be providing a YouTube link, so if there's something just really burning that I said and you can't remember, you'll be able to go back to the YouTube and take a look at it, or share it with your colleagues. It might be on vacation if they want to view. The program documents, that second link will be program documents. Here is what's listed along overall program description, the step-by-step process, and accessing Nucleus One. There's an application supplement, which I haven't talked a lot about because I've talked about the substance that's in it. It's a good document. It's even a little more thorough with what kind of documentation, how the calculations are done. You can see in the spreadsheet, but it can be a little hard to follow a spreadsheet calculation. So it provides some good, useful information, a little detail on offset funding, et cetera. You have your review staff list, and there's also an FAQ document. Again, in your packet, some useful questions there, some additional things that I'm not covering here, so take a look through it. That one is intended to be a living document, so as your good questions are coming in, and we feel we really need to express something that's applicable to probably most, we'll update that FAQ and post it to the website. We'll make sure it's clearly labeled what's different, what's changed, so you can refer to that and get a little guidance that way. the detail application, I'm going to go through a brief example. That'll be there as well, and the PowerPoint and YouTube. Okay. Are you ready? I'm not sure I'm ready. All right. All righty, folks. So this is the intake form. Rose, our systems administrator, created this. It's 3 pages. So your navigation up here in the top, that's as far as you go. It should be pretty easy. Always important throughout, take a skim through the directions. You'll see here, as well as in the step-by-step guide, be prepared to have your IRS determination letter for uploading, as well as your mission statement or bylaws. So those would be 2 documents you want to have on hand electronically. Otherwise, you're filling in who you are, your tax ID, nonprofits, provide your 501, your tax ID status. That'll be substantiated with your tax-exempt letter. Address and contact name. Ideally, the person who is filling out the form and will fill out the detail application. Next, we have one of the 4 areas. If you serve more than one of the 4 areas, based on your mission or the significance of who you serve in a greater capacity, choose one, okay? You're going to talk about your mission statement, upload your bylaws. Are you applying for one or both? And then you're going to talk about what's the financial impact that your organization experienced. So you don't have to go into tremendous detail, but kind of an overview. This gives us an idea. That's the first step, so it gives us an idea of where you're coming from. Describe your services, and here this gives the ability to describe who you serve and what your services are in Kent County, and if you have services outside of Kent County, gives us a sense. If you don't, your percentage of services within Kent County would be 100. If you do have some in Kent and other areas, provide us your percentages. Don't worry, the application will do the math for you. So if you get it wrong, it'll tell you. So that's nice and helpful. And then finally, you're here at signature. Your authorized representative is your person within the organization that's capable of obligating the organization. So it would be your executive director, maybe your treasurer, your board president, those kinds of folks. And then once this form is submitted, again, you get an email. You should get an email within minutes with the PDF of your submittal attached. If you don't, the step-by-step guide also addresses this, but check your junk mail. Sometimes mail does not like automated emails. Check your spam. And if you don't get it, call Rose. She'll help you. Poor Rose. And then lastly, just a thought on here too is if you have missed a field, it will tell you. It will put you back on the page where the field is missed. So if that occurs and you're just like, I can't submit this, that is maybe what's going on. Okay, so see, not so bad there. on the intake form. Okay, let me talk to you briefly about the detail application. So a few more steps here. I'll walk kind of quickly through it. We're obviously asking for some identifying information. This summary tab, anything, I'll call attention to this in the directions, anything that's grayed or otherwise has coloration to it, don't bother with it. It's already got a calculation in it, it's got a formula, it'll auto-populate. This sheet here on the summary page will auto-populate based on what you put in the detail of the CLR and CCI programs. So don't mess with it. But if you do, it's okay. We're going to be checking calculations. The other thing here, I'll show you in a second on the other page, is you may encounter, gee, I put something in on the other tab. Why is it showing up here? Why isn't it showing up here? We have some fields where you're allocating percentages. So percentages of your lost revenue, percentages of your increased costs. This is for entities that have multiple locations and maybe there's only one in Kent County. So 25% of your revenue really goes to Kent County, or 25% of your increased cost goes to Kent County. Or maybe you had a huge cleaning cost for your facility in Kent, but the other ones, you know, were very minor. So in each area, you get to put in a percentage. So if you forget, it won't show up here in the summary. It's also another good double check for you as you're filling this out. You're seeing that the numbers are changing. Okay. Signature page. You're filling in who you are and the organization. Do read these. We encourage that. Who's your authorized representative? Just the note here on signature. You can put in a signature just by typing, or if you've got an electronic signature of your executive director, you know, you sign a piece of paper, take a picture of it, or you scan it, and you've got that. You can put that in here too. Either way is acceptable. Okay. Directions. I guess we all learned in grade school we're supposed to read the directions. So I would take a skim through these. It does reference the percentage consideration that I just talked about. Now, let me go through the COVID loss recovery in just a couple of minutes, giving you an example here. So these numbers in red are wholly hypothetical. And I apologize if they bear no resemblance whatsoever to your universes. But thought we'd give it a try for the functionality. Okay, overviews. There are 3 pages or 3 general areas of this. This is the biggest tab. It's really brightly colored so you can orient to where you are. It can be really easy to be filling out the 2020 when you're meant to be doing 2019 or vice versa. So this helps you get around to, okay, that's 2021 is kind of that mustard, 2020 is yellow, and 2019 is the base year. So remember, 2019 pre-pandemic. So what you're doing in this, your reduced revenues. So what income you in the 2020 and 21 was impacted, you put that here. So it's broken into kind of events and activities, fundraising activities, and then other funding. Could be donations, federal, could be a fee for service. Your increased expenses, and this all-important area of notes. Please give us breadcrumbs. It helps us to understand. I know we're going to be talking to you, but it also helps in that documentation. So please spend the extra few minutes and write some narrative around what's going on in your sheets. So in 2019, here in this example, we had a gala that was affected in 2020. We also did a concert fundraiser that was we do every year, and it was affected in the future years. And we did a third event that's kind of like the concert. So we're going to list the concert twice because it's going to become our comparison event for the next year. Grant funding and donations here reflected. Okay, so folks, here's that percentage. Let me show you what happens when we don't have it in there. So this 0 is what shows up on the summary page. So you need it. In every instance, we'll be checking, of course, too, and going over this with you. And then here in increased expenses, we said payroll and cleaning occurred in the next year, so we're going to put in our base year in 2019. Okay, and then we're going to write some description. Now, 2020. Here's that event. That event had to totally be canceled. So did that concert. Nothing. So you can see what this looks like. All zeros here. That's okay. That's what you experienced in 2020. Okay. This talent show, a little off to the comparison concert, but was anticipated to have similar results. So our comparison project was the concert for the talent show. Okay, also tanked, could not be held. Federal grant funding and donations also were down. So 300K and 75 were down in 2020. Okay. Expenses, payroll and cleaning, but you can also add other things here that were just plain old new expenses. You know, when did you ever have to buy PPE? In 2015 or 2019. Maybe you had to really stock up on it, personal protective equipment. So you can put those new things in here too. And then here's where our offset funding comes in. Maybe in this year, in 2020, you got some other funding from the state. Maybe you received $30,000 to help compensate for your overall operations. Okay. All good. Now, we go to 2021. We were able to hold the gala, but not a lot of folks came. So we, we didn't make as much on it as we do in other years. So you record that there, and the spreadsheet will do the math on the difference. The concert, we still didn't do. We love that concert, but we just couldn't do it again based on whatever, the results of the gala. So that also, again, ends up being a 0. So I just want to call attention. I've skipped over in each of the years, but I'll address it here. Each of these in the reduced revenues, if you're doing a fundraising event, you raise so much in gross, and then you have to pay some expenses against it. Whether the rental of the hall or decorations, table rentals, what have you. So record those, record both of those. And then in each of these, list the documents that substantiate this. So here you'll have bank statements for the revenues that you saw on the gala this year, and then as well in 2019. You'll list the same thing, bank statements. Be different years, bank statements, but maybe you collected your funding for that event over 3 months. provide bank statements that show what deposits are, or deposit slips if you've got them. Here, we also will accept the event report. So if you prepared a report, you can simply state that in that field. Federal grant, again, your federal funding is still off in 2021, but it's improved. You know, provide your source letter, your transfer to substantiate what funding you received. And then donations, however you record that. If you've got, again, bank statements could be something of that nature. Here, you're going to want to provide your payroll records, your cleaning, invoices to the cleaning company or for the sanitizing machine if you've got the invoice still remaining. Okay. And here, substantiate again. Tell us what's going on. In this year, in our example, where you didn't receive any offset funding, so we just plain left it blank. You'll notice that the comparison event, the concert that we said is the talent show in 2020, is not reflected in 2021. It's really because if you are trying a new event in 1 year, you're going to decide whether you're going to do that event in the next year. So kind of taking 2 bites at a brand new event, we thought was, maybe a little more appropriate to just do it for the 1 year. So if you had an event in 2020 that was a brand new event you were going to do and it couldn't happen, we'll give it to you for that year, but in 2021, it's maybe not the most robust way to provide the funding. Alrighty, almost done, folks. Let me move on to the capital improvement program. You're going to describe, this is another tab. You're going to describe your project, general description, describe the related impact, remember that, that aspect, and how the project addresses the impact. So it sounds a little stilted, but do try to provide some narrative in each area. For the projects that are over $1 million in construction, so this is not $1 million including your lawyers and your design and your engineering, et cetera. It's the construction, $1 million in construction or more. Provide a justification here. Where you are in the development stage and sources and uses. And in this example, we've got $400,000 in bank financing, some capital project fundraising, capital campaign, and there's a federal grant. And you're going to use those funds on soft costs, design and construction, and then way down at the bottom is your CCI program funding. So that's your ask. So you can see the 2 bottom lines equal, and you're off to the races. Describe your funding sources there, any factors that might cause you delay, and then here is the document list that substantiates the above entries. So tell us what you're providing, if you would. Your commitment letters to the various funding sources, your development budget, of course. There's a little bit of direction here. If you are just duplicating what's written on the left, you can say included or not applicable. So you got that. And then here, last but not least, we referenced that you've got, you don't have documentation for something, or you just did not keep your books in that way. You didn't do your payroll that way. And in this case here, we've got $60,000 in payroll. Actually, this would be 20 and 21. And this actually does hark back to the fields in the previous years, in 2020 and 2021. One was $50,000, one was 10, so $60,000. And here's your justification. You're explaining what happened. You don't keep your books in that level of fine detail. And that, my friends, is a wrap. Questions, please.
If we could get you to use a microphone. Laura, if you wouldn't mind working that side, and I'll work this side. As people ask questions, we'll just give them the mic so that our guests on the internet can hear us.
Yep.
Thank you.
You gotta make it official. Okay. Hi. Thanks. Based on the setup of the Excel file that you just reviewed, if an organization is planning on submitting for both areas of funding, the CLR and the CCI, are they submitted at the same time?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no way to do one and then work on the second application. Everything goes in at one time.
Okay. We can work with you on that if you really are, if you've really got a lag between the two. I can understand that there would be, you might have good information on one and want to get that in and get that rolling. Yeah, we can probably work with you on it.
There was one other question that came in.
Thank you.
Regarding the age of the nonprofit. So can you touch on that?
Sure. So early in the slides, we said a nonprofit needs to be, it can be formed in 2020 or earlier. And the reason that is, you saw the comparison. We're using 2019 to 2020 and 2019 to 2021. If an entity was formed in 2020, we've got no year to base it on. We have no 2019 information to understand that organization, the impact. So what we'll do in that circumstance is we'll look at 2021. Still COVID impacts, generally speaking, less so, but we'll make a comparison between those 2 years. If a nonprofit was established in 2021, we've got no basis to establish a loss or any increased costs. So it's really not something that we can look to. We can't justify to the federal government, look, there's been a COVID impact, because there's nothing to compare it to. That makes sense. In the case of the few cases that may exist for a nonprofit that's formed in 2020, again, we'll look at the 2021 numbers and compare.
Gina, I want to add that there may be a possibility that a nonprofit was created in response to, and in those situations, we are going to have a review panel where there's some of those that don't quite fit the application criteria that can be considered. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, thank you, Mike. That's a very great point. We have lots of wonderful nuggets in our documents, and that's one. Where we have questions where there needs to be a judgment call or an ambiguity, in a case as Mike is suggesting, we have a small advisory group that's being formed, has been formed, to take those questions and considerations too. So staff would, identify them. You would, explain them to us. we would do some research and structure it as, within the Treasury guidance, and then bring that to the advisory committee for some guidance and help on how to proceed. So we have a lot of ways to answer, you know, as important as all the work is, your organizations are disparate, and you do many things, you're formed differently, you have different kinds of projects, so try to be as flexible as we can to try and accommodate as many differences as we can.
Any other questions?
Have one over here.
Can you tell me, under the eligible nonprofits, when you work with people with disabilities, are these categories just examples, or are these meant to be the whole spectrum of disability populations that are covered under these funds?
Make your case. I mean, tell us if there is a population between, you know, kind of in between those.
Right.
As every one of them has an other services, each is not intended to be specifically exhaustive. So let's
thank
give it
you.
a conversation.
Hi, Karen speaking with NCall. So is there any room to apply for anything that's outside of these 4 buckets? For instance, we're planning to do a economic development building downtown in Dover, and it addresses ARPA's requirements in terms of economic development and jobs and those kind of things, and I don't see that fitting into any of these 4 buckets.
So this is one program. It's intended for nonprofits, so at this point, no, but.
We're nonprofit, so let's put
But-
that.
So hear me out here. This is a little bit of a subtle point, that if there is if the organization serves any of these 4 populations, and you had a financial impact, apply. Here's why. When the funding is awarded, when it's approved, you know, your circumstances at the time that it's approved are you've endured the losses, you've weathered the pandemic financial, or at least most of them.
Capital.
So what you do with the funds that are awarded, really the only obligation is that you spend those for operating or, you know, a capital project. So your project that you may be speaking of may very well fall within those 2 categories. You may be able to use these funds for operating, and that operating can help with the project. Does that make sense?
No, sorry. But, so if it was a capital application, it'd have to fall within those four buckets. Is that fair to say? Or if it's an economic development building that addresses need for jobs, would that be eligible to apply?
I think we should discuss it. If it is for employment, could it employ homeless? Or could it employ
Okay, so that's part of my question. How tight is this homelessness? Because to me, another question is that the lack of housing is why people are homeless. So are you allowed to develop affordable housing as a capital project, or transitional housing?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great.
But understand, you got to relate it to the pandemic, and you got to, cast your light. Yes.
Before Janine goes, Janine, if I could just I'll further address Karen's point. has been stated, this grant program is tightly wrapped around those 4 buckets, so to speak. It was a prioritization process levy court put together, but it's not the end. I don't think this isn't the last program. With this program and the $8 million that's been initially allocated toward it, we're at about the 50% mark on our ARPA funding, allocated, not spent, but allocated. So there's more to go with this, and these were needs that we heard repeatedly from entities that were coming to levy court meetings or submitting letters to commissioners about needs that they were seeking to address. So when we looked, there were maybe 12 or so different things that we looked at in April, and they went through this ranking process, the commissioners did, and these are the 4 that filtered to the top. And so we, once we got through the small business and hospitality grant program, we wanted to, get started with a nonprofit, and we just focused on these 4 areas. It's not to say this is the universe of what we're going to do. And it's ultimately the commissioners, and we have one of them here tonight, it's ultimately the commissioners' determination on how we allocate out these funds. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Janine. I'm sorry.
Sure. My question relates to both transportation and food on the capital side. Are you looking only at can purchasing, for example, a vehicle for transportation be included? That if it addresses the needs of the population, one or more of the population groups that you've identified? And the same with food. Are you talking about just the physical plant to generate food, or are you talking about the supply of food over a period of years to meet the food needs of those populations?
Do you consider any of those things part of your operating costs?
Yes, but I'm not looking at losses on the operating side. I'm looking at future project.
Okay. So the use of funds, if you have losses, would absolutely work for purchasing food, for purchasing a vehicle. If your organization was not financially impacted, and I think you should talk to us, because
Okay.
we might be able to find some costs that you could apply for.
Okay, thank you.
But then you can use those, the award, you can use the award for those things.
Okay.
I have one more on this side. Sorry, this is my last one.
Ask away.
Just have a question. If your nonprofit operates statewide or in 2 counties, as opposed to just Kent County, and a capital project is planned to serve one of the priority populations in Kent County, but the modifications to the building would take place in another county, is that still acceptable? Or does the capital project have to take place within the Kent County location?
That is a good question.
All right, that is your last question.
I'm going to take that question under advisement. That would be one we'd have to think about.
Gina,
Can you identify who is on the panel?
I'm sorry,
I
Mark.
think Eric might have wanted to address that question.
Okay. Eric, are you on? Would you like to respond?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Eric Jenga is our deputy project manager for the program. He has decades of experience working with federal funding and disaster recovery and community development. So he's our go-to guy along with our legal team. So Eric often has excellent input. So Eric, what do you got for us?
Okay, so first in regards to an or a facility located outside of the county. Based on information provided to tribal governments are allowed to do work where they have facilities that are outside of their tribal lands and benefit those of the tribe. So the case has been made that if you can show that you are primarily serving those within the county, or that they make up a majority of those being served, that you may be able to have the project be outside of the county. It just depends on who you are serving, who you're providing the services for, your primary clients or folks using the facility. So that this has come up. So there has been some months for that to happen. In regards to the question, so that's that one. In regards to the question before that, about services moving forward. So the first program is designed as a compensation for direct impacts, essentially your financial impacts. So now how you use the funds that you're being compensated is completely up to you. If you want to use them for services moving forward or however you want to use them, that's up to you. That's at your discretion.
Yeah,
You're just being compensated for that. Those additional costs you had to incur or any losses you suffered due to reduced revenues.
Yeah, we understand the question, though, that there's an understanding that the organization did not suffer financial losses, and so there's a question of whether they should apply. And I'm suggesting that let's have a conversation about the conditions, that there might be some costs that we could get in that could help you with some of those things you want to do. Thanks, Eric.
Who will comprise the panel? Is it going to be levy corps commissioners or a combination of them and economic development people?
I'll address that. Thank you, Tom. It will be a subset of commissioners, president, vice president, and one additional commissioner. And if they're relatively bright line decisions, that panel will make them. If they feel that they need to refer it to the full levy court, they will do that. That's basically the idea.
On your loss of revenue sheet, you had the gala, and then you had event 1, 2. So let's say the organization has 20 fundraising events in 1 month. Can we just classify it by the month, compare January this year to January last year?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
But you want to show us, the revenues, whether you've got a report that shows the revenues from the 20 Little League
So a financial
things,
report that shows that. You don't necessarily need to see, I mean, we can show you where all the events were canceled, some of them were under contract. Do we have to get that detailed, or can it be just the financial report?
I think the financial report ought to be enough. Depending on what it looks like, we might want to see more detail.
Well, we keep detailed information, for January, so we know how many events and what the income was. And then we know the next January we didn't have anything, so we can show that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That should work. 20 events. Good job.
Any other questions, anybody? No? How about online? Anyone waiting to?
So if there's participating online and you have any questions, if you can raise your hand so you can go to the front of the queue, and then we will field your questions at a time.
Okay, it doesn't appear that we have any additional questions. So tomorrow morning, you're all going to go online and you're going to take the intake form and you're going to fill it out. And it's fairly straightforward. And I'd just like to ask Gina, okay, so I fill out the intake form and I hit send. What happens next?
You get an email. You get an email with your with a PDF of your application, and then we assign a staff person within 2 business days, and that staff person will reach out to you. If you don't get your email, you got Rose to reach out to, and if you just have burning questions that occur to you, and you after you know, tomorrow morning, feel free to give Edison a ring or shoot him an email about eligibility or anything until you got your assigned person. And then you're off to the races.
So this program is designed, we know that there's a variety or a range of capacity in various organizations. Some organizations are large, they have people that do this kind of work all the time, that's their job, and there are others that are volunteers or they're working on a very small staff. It's designed to help all ranges. So the people that were introduced at the beginning, and they'll get assigned to your particular case. They're going to be your case manager, basically. They're going to help you complete it at wherever you're at in the process. If you're, you know, you really don't need a whole lot of help, then go for it. But if you really have questions or you need step-by-step help, rely on them. That's what they're there for. And their mission is to help you get the application completed. So we're looking forward to a lot of applications completed, and so we can process them and get them out to you, get the funds out to you for all the good works that you're doing. Yeah, Paul?
The application process that we discussed tonight, I realize it's for those 4 things, homeless and senior citizens, et cetera. I understand that. But the next round, when the county decides how much they want to do next time, are we going to be doing the same application next time as this time?
Oh, great question. This one was designed based on the that prioritization thing I mentioned. There were other items that were further down in the queue that the commissioners want to address. There were some issues related to stormwater management impacts and water quality and ventilation in buildings that may have, you know, older or inferior ventilation that can address, you know, improved air quality. And then we'll be getting into those in different ways, but I imagine we'll learn something through this process and see how easy or difficult it is to complete for folks, and we'll probably adjust and learn as we go, because so much of this, we learned a lot working with the Chamber of Commerce on that program, and that's a completely different design than this one. In fact, that actually got started before we had Tetra Tech on board, and then Tetra Tech helped us navigate through and get it into a place where we know it'll comply with all the federal requirements. But hard to say exactly, Paul, but I imagine we're going to try to address the needs that are out there that we hear about. We'll bring them to the commissioners. They'll make some decisions around them, and there will be a few. There are a few large economic development considerations that are going to be dealt with as separate entities that were basically, for lack of a better term, a one-off type of requests that the commissioners will deal with separately. It didn't fit this type of application, but they were significant requests that came in that commissioners want to address. They've expressed an interest in dealing with, so they're going to deal with them separately. Yeah. Sir.
Thank you. So I saw for children and youth, it was about 2 million roughly.
Yep.
Is there, and I'm just curious, maybe I missed it, maybe I didn't, is there a max and a minimum amount to ask for or to write for?
No, there's no minimum. I think folks will, as you're considering the application, you'll probably consider if you've got a kind of nominal amount, you might not feel like it's worth pursuing. But the program parameters, there's no minimum. For the loss recovery program, we have a $100,000 cap for the sum of the revenue losses and the expenses less the offset funding. And then capital was had up to $500,000 or 50%, whichever is less, for 50% of the construction cost, whichever is less.
And again, back to that review body, that arbitrating body, if there are compelling requests that go above those thresholds, they will be, but they're qualified. Otherwise, we may direct them for review and consideration to the review body. Gerald.
Thank you, sir. For the capital projects, what if the building is co-located with another nonprofit? Should just the one nonprofit go and, in reference to social distancing and shared space? Should one nonprofit go for the application, or can it be a partnership because of the two nonprofits being co-located in one space?
Right. It's probably better for one of them to be the applicant unless you've got like a joint venture entity, because you're going to, when the check ultimately gets written, it's going to need to be written to one entity. And there's probably one of those organizations that's maybe taking the lead on the development. So that would be the logical one.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
You got Carolyn.
If you know that your loss is well in excess of $100,000, do you still go ahead and show all of your loss, or do you cap it at the $100,000?
It's your choice, but we recommend you show it.
Show it all. Okay.
That gives us information about your organization, it gives us information about the program, and could inform changes. So better to tell. I think it helps us all to understand.
Anything else? Anyone? Chad?
Just a clarifying question to that. If you're not planning on applying for CLR, there's no need to show losses that an organization sustained during COVID for any benefit. Your response was, it tells us a lot about your organization, so on and so forth. But if you're not planning on applying for CLR, there's no reason to show those losses to justify anything that your organization did during COVID. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, you don't have to spend time on this application if you're not applying for, if you wish to, feel free, but you probably have a few other things on your desk to do. So it would be nice to know, but that's not what is really being asked.
It's suitable at that point to put together in the justification section on the bottom of one of those pages further information about what your organization may have done during COVID that had an effect if you weren't applying for CLR. Accurate statement.
I'm not sure I understand the question. If you're just saying,
You said
providing
that
a narrative.
You said
Go
that
ahead.
you have more things on your desk to do than complete all of those other sections, which I totally agree. But then you alluded to the fact that it might be helpful to get additional information about the organization. So to put a review or a narrative in place about what your organization did in response to COVID, it would be helpful to the committee.
Yes, yes, that would be, and that's not a huge amount of time for you to.
Thank you.
Yep, that's a great solution.
Thanks for having this, by the way. When it comes to completeness of the application and who moves forward to the committee and so forth, how is that determined? Like, say, for instance, if the application is available and some things don't apply, but are somehow required, but are you going to go back and forth as to, hey, complete these things, or can you submit what's relevant and then the committee decide whether or not those things were needed or not? How to get past step one?
What we will seek to do is figure it out with you. So applications, we would love every application to come in completed perfectly with all documentation and, clear as a bell. That won't happen. Some may work with us extensively and, complete an application that looks pretty darn good. Some folks may, do the application and need additional. We'll be following up. We're certainly not going to ask you to do any sections that aren't relevant to your ask. But if you are asking for certain things and there's documentation, say, needed, we'll probably have a conversation with you about, all right, what can you provide? Where can you, find any substantiation around this? To try and get something that explains a particular number. So you could, anyone could submit an application. We can't prevent you from, Nucleus One doesn't detect whether the application's complete. It just takes it. But we'll be reviewing it, and we'll communicate back and forth. If there's an item that doesn't have documentation with it, it's just a plain old number in there, we'll have a conversation. And if it can't be substantiated, we may ask you for an attestation and fill out that section, that kind of thing. But hopefully we can figure everything out in dialogue and get it done efficiently.
Gina, we have a question online. And again, I would like to remind anyone who has questions online to raise your electronic hand. It can be found at the bottom of the screen. And for those who are joining us by phone, you can notify us that you have a question by pressing *3. Mary, you can unmute your line and proceed with your question.
Quick question. What age is considered a senior?
That's a good question. We do not have a formal definition. It is organized by your entity's definition as a default. But we would look at, we would look at the submittal and, if something looked curious, we'd ask you for some substantiation.
I'm going to ask Susan Durham. Do we have any specific, when we have a senior tax credit, for example, is there an age that we use?
65.
65.
Yeah, so some say 62.
Does that answer your question, Mary?
It does, thank you. We have another entity who gives us grants based on seniors, and they use the age 60 and above. And I was noticing that there are different definitions, so that's why I had the question. So thank you.
Thank you. We would look at 60 and above and get get clear on what a number was. We'd probably ask you for some substantiation around that. We honestly, we did not think about a specific age cutoff, really relying mostly on self definition by the nonprofits. We are aiming to be more inclusive than less. So if that helps you any, we'd probably just want to have a conversation with you and talk about documenting your program.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. Well, I really want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Really appreciate your interest in this program. I know some of you have submitted requests that have been around for quite a while. We greatly appreciate your patience on this. The whole ARPA program was a significant learning process for everyone involved. You probably know some of this, but the final rule didn't come out until January 6th, and everyone scrambled to kind of learn what that was saying, and Tetra Tech was a great help to us with that. But and then just the sheer process, getting to this point, it took us. We have a capacity limitations, and we were dealing with the chamber items and the fire company requests, and those are kind of moving on now, and it's freed up time for us to focus on nonprofits. So greatly appreciate your patience as we proceed here, and I certainly encourage everyone to fill out that intake form, and that'll get you in the process, and then we'll take it from there. Commissioner Sweeney, you have anything you want to say at the end?
No, just real quick. If you take nothing away from tonight, first of all, thanks to Mike and Susan and Laura and Mark for being here, and Gina and her staff, and all you guys for coming out and those on the phone. If you take nothing away from tonight, don't just assume that you don't fit some bucket to get ARPA funds. Fill out the forms. If there's questions, Gina and her staff will help you through it to figure it out. If you don't fit any of those 4 buckets, I think you heard some of the questions, you may not fit the 4 buckets, there's other opportunities that are coming up. So you heard it tonight. I wish you all luck. I'll be looking forward to seeing the forms online tomorrow morning. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right. Well, hope everyone has a great evening, and we'll be looking for your forms to be completed. Thank you all.
If you haven't signed in, please do so, and there are packets at the front if you need. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Oh, for sure. I look forward to your intake form.